another week in these very interesting times. Welcome back, and if you're new here, hello, I'm Ms. Tech. As I said at the beginning, it's complicated, and this week's topic, I got two topics. I know if you were following me on Twitter, I said I was going to talk about combat sports. I'm not really. I'm just going to mention one thing. But I'm more interested in tech global news this week. So I'm going to touch on the UFC a little bit, and then I want to go into some interesting news that came from Foxconn today about Apple and India. But let's start with the combat sports talk. Now, if you remember me or know me from a previous show that I used to be on, I had a lot of opinions about combat sports, especially the UFC. My opinions haven't changed. If anything, they've been more legitimized with the news that came this week from Platinum Mike Perry and him getting into an altercation and the racial epithets and punching somebody, and the hand wringing and the softball hit by the UFC where he's got possibly has a drinking problem, emotional problems, needs to go to rehab for a while. We're going to work through this with him, etc. ad nauseum until you just throw the fuck up. Where have we seen this before? Oh, we see this all the time. We've seen it with Conor McGregor. We've seen it with Greg Hardy. We've seen it time and time again. We saw it with John Jones. And I'm bored with it. And this is why I don't watch the UFC anymore. If you can't pay your fighters or support your fighters, and you keep lauding people who've got terrible actions in their personal life, which, your personal life is your personal life and your professional life is your professional life, and people should stay out of your personal life. But when you are having such bad behavior where everybody can see it, then, come on, you need to let these people go. I mean, and this is where we saw in most professional spheres, unless you're making buku bucks, you will let go. But that tells you, if you're making bucks, they don't let you go. You go through this standardized apology process, and it works for people in sports, it works for people in music, it works for people everywhere who have their name in public. But it's a stupid apology. You sit there and say that you've got emotional, drinking, whatever the fuck issues. You say you got to be quiet and listen, and you go away. You go to rehab, or you're just quiet for a while. And then, 8 months to 12 months later, you show back up with an apology tour where all your good deeds have been shown. And then you get in the public, you get another signing of a fight, a movie, a record deal, what the fuck ever. And everything's good as new. Meanwhile, you've had a year to just go and do whatever the hell you wanted to in quiet. Basically get to relax. I was going to mention this about 3 weeks ago when I didn't do the podcast, which if you are following or have been a fan of comics, hearing what happened with the accusations against Warren Ellis. And I wanted to talk about the accusations against Warren Ellis and bring up, I was going to say George Michael, but I mean Mike Tyson. Don't ask me. My brain is cross-connected sometimes. But if you had the opportunity or have been following to see Warren Ellis's non-apology, basically being quiet and retreating back, and a lot of his projects being, pulled from him or put on the back burner, it's par for the course. This is how you do it. This is what always happens. The other reason why I wanted to bring up Mike Tyson, though, is because, of the accusations that, led to Mike Tyson being incarcerated were pretty shitty. And as a woman, it makes me very uncomfortable what he was accused of. But later on in life, I'd like to believe it seems like he's legitimately sorry. I mean, I ended up liking Mike Tyson, which is hard to kind of get my head around. I guess you have to ask yourself when apologies are real apologies, and when people are really sorry, whether they're sorry because of their actions and they know they're wrong, or they're sorry that they got caught. And I want to believe that 8 times out of 10, they're sorry that they got caught. Because if they really were sorry, they would have stopped before they got caught. And that's just my logic about it. But they're only sorry because they got caught. There are a few people when you see them later on after the whole drama with whatever it is that they were accused of or convicted of, are around and they legitimately seem like they've learned their lesson and they're sorry. And you have to ask yourself, when does forgiveness happen? Is forgiveness based on whether there's true contrition, true for, knowing that you've done something wrong, or whether forgiveness is based on the severity of the crime and that some crimes are unforgivable. As a woman, I have a different, probably litmus test as to what I find acceptable and what is not acceptable, or what can be forgiven, what can't be forgiven. There are some things that I think absolutely can never be forgiven. So if you're a pedophile, I'm sorry, there's no way. I don't care if you are sorry, have been incarcerated, did your time and shit. I'm never going to forgive you for that. Never, ever, ever, ever forgive you for that. I felt the same way, or I feel the same way about rape, but that's why I bring up Mike Tyson, because in his old age, I can't help but to like him, and I feel really uncomfortable with this. I feel really fucking uncomfortable with it, but he seems like he learned his lesson and in his behavior, and there was some legitimate outside forces that were not keeping him in control and were just glorifying his lesser aspects, his baser instincts, and let him just, become the worst that he could be as opposed to the best that he could be. And I find it hard quite often when he does something that I find interesting, charming, and nice, Don't know how, if it, I could be right and I'm being proven wrong, because recently with him getting all buffed up and talking about fighting again, it makes me wonder if that base instinct is back. A few months ago, if you watch anything with Joe Rogan, God forbid, Joe Rogan was kind of egging him on about why he didn't come back to fighting, and he said he didn't want to wake up the beast. I mean, Rogan's a dick. Sorry, Joe Rogan is a dick. And the man was saying that he didn't want to do it because he didn't wake up the beast. And then 6 months later, we see Mike Tyson buffing out, looking evil and mean like old Iron Mike. Was Mike Tyson called Iron Mike, or am I thinking about Iron Mike Dicta? Did they share that thing, that title? I don't know. I don't remember. But it's kind of like I never liked what Rogan did with that, because that's just like, being at a party with a friend who has a coke habit, who's given it up, and you're snorting coke and say, come on, just one line will be okay. One line will be okay. And it's like, dude, he's a rehab. He's been through rehab. He doesn't want to do coke anymore. Why are you shoving? You're not a real friend if you're shoving that in somebody's face, right? So, I don't know. I don't know what to think about Tyson. I can't help but to like him right now, but I'm keeping my eye on him. But in order to go back to where this started with, Mike Perry and the UFC and some of the various other people in the UFC who I think should have been cut or never signed to begin with. It's just more of the same, more bad behavior. Definitely doesn't redeem the UFC. Definitely doesn't seem like a sport that anybody... I hate to use this because this is going to sound very classist. And I don't want to sound classist, but I don't know. Anyone who's got some sort of true moral compass could not support. And I know I'm going to piss off a lot of people by saying this right now, but this is my opinion on it, right? Good, bad, or different. This is my opinion on it. It's why I don't watch the UFC anymore. It's why I don't support the UFC, because I don't feel like the UFC cares about moral values. And I know moral values are very subjective to the person, but like the UFC does not give a shit about women. All right. Doesn't give a shit about women. I'm a woman, so I take that personally. Doesn't give a shit about women. Doesn't give a shit about their fighters. Just doesn't give a shit. And then we add on it to now this insistence on having fights during the time of COVID, which I just think is completely irresponsible. And I have nothing to say about it. Or I have a lot to say about it and nothing good. None of it's good. So there you have it. That's what I was going to, kind of allude to, or that's what I was alluding to this week when I was mentioning it on Twitter that I was going to talk about it. I'm going to jump the subject because I'm done with talking about combat sports right now, and I want to talk to something that I find a hell of a lot more interesting, which if you're of the tech variety, tech person, or want to talk about politics or globalism and stuff, you might find this interesting. And some news came out today that Apple supplier Foxconn is going to invest $1 billion in India. Now, If you know anything about where Apple has their products made, or where a lot of these technical companies have their products made, the fact that they're interested in investing $1 billion in India when they've had all of these factories in China for so long is really, really, really interesting. It tells you a couple of things that are going on in the world, a couple of things going on in tech, but even bigger, what's going on in the world. Now, let's go back to conspiracy theory talk again. I don't really like to go too much into it, and I don't believe that there's this deep, dark cabal of global elites who are all planning shit. In the general scheme of things, I think that there are wolves and there are sheep, and you got to hope that you've got good wolves and, good wolves that are going to watch the sheep. I think it's human nature for some people to want to be at the top of the heap, make as much advantage for themselves as they can. They're smart enough, crafty enough to be able to do that, and that there's other people who are too lazy or just plain too lazy, not smart enough, or don't care and unaware of what's going on. You have leaders and you have followers. What you got to hope, what you got to pray is those wolves that are at the top of the pack. And it's actually a bad analogy because wolves don't work this way, but let's just go with it because that's what most people seem to understand. You got to hope that those wolves that are at the top of the pack are good wolves and not bad wolves. Whereas they might be the leaders, they might be taking advantage as they can, but they aren't totally, cannibalizing their own pack in order to have advantage over everybody else. When you talk about these global elites, these cabal of people, they're all just people who are smart enough to work the system. And I don't believe personally that most of them are inherently bad. But when you get into a process or a culture or a level, you're going to only deal with other people of that level. And it gets very incestuous and very distorted and fucked up, basically. And rich people are going to marry rich people. Rich people are going to leave money to their rich kids. And because of how we have this different classes in society, these things won't mix. And bear with me. I have a point with this. With all the shit that's going on with COVID right now, those people who have positions of power, who understand how the stock market works, how finances work, how money works, are still operating in the way as business as usual. They are beholden to the shareholder. Now, we can have Black Lives Matter. We can talk about Bernie Sanders. We can have Joe Biden even saying that we need to stop having shareholder capitalism. But that's not going to change overnight. That's not going to change overnight. It takes time for there to be large systemic change. And I know not everybody, so many people are just like rah, 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 hoping that things will be completely different in 6 months, or actually it'd be like 7 months from now, which hopefully we'll get rid of Trump and have Biden. But it's not. It's not. It'll get better a little bit, but it's not. Which means I want to go back to talking about this Foxconn deal. Part of the reason why Foxconn has decided to move all of this work to India is because Indian workers are less expensive than Chinese workers, which is really interesting when you look about it, because a lot of the manufacturing that we've done in the United States went overseas because the labor was cheaper. Well, two things. The labor was cheaper, and for some of the goods, for the raw materials for those goods, cheaper overseas or easier than transporting it back to America. Now, I know technology. I keep saying I know technology. There are a lot of rare earths, rare materials that go into your iPhones and your Samsungs and your technology, your tech gear that comes from China or from the deep sea, and we don't have it in the US. So it's just more cost effective to have labor and manufacturing closer to where those materials are. So the reason why this is interesting is because, number one, we've had a lot of manufacturing go over to China because of, how close it is to raw materials that are needed, which reduces shipping cost, but also because of the cost of labor. I mean, you've heard all of those horror stories of Chinese workers being locked into factories and wanting to kill themselves because they have to work, and they're making pennies on the dollar to make your iPhone. But now, a lot of that stuff is being looked at to be moved over to India. Now, why is that? why are we suddenly going to India? Well, the reason being is because of finances and because of politics. And if you've been watching what's been going on in the world after COVID, and I think this also proves that China did not unleash COVID on the world on purpose, but there's been some border skirmishes between China and India. There have been heightened animosity between those two countries. And I apologize. I have no idea what that is in the background. Somebody's popping off a large firework, and I can't do anything about it, so I apologize for that. But going back to what I was saying, there's been the border skirmishes and a degradation of the relationship between China and India, which is kind of interesting because when we think about the world, we usually are thinking about, because we're so U.S.-centric, at least if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are, about the problems that the U.S. has with Russia or the problems that the U.S. has with China. And these little things that have been working themselves up have kind of gone underneath the radar. It's really important when you see manufacturing for these high-end products moving from the country that we're usually used to seeing them, which is China, going over to India. And as I was trying to say, that's because of several different reasons. Some of it has to do with the way the politics have been going on in the world. Because of COVID, China is not exactly trusted right now by a lot of the Western countries that buy these goods. Australia has had some issues with China because of COVID. We know the United States has had issues with China because of COVID. And, there's other countries as well that have just said that, how can you trust China when they didn't really admit to the problem that COVID was going to be for everyone else? Excuse me. Now, again, I want to be sure here that you understand that this doesn't excuse how Trump has handled the COVID pandemic here in the United States. Absolutely disgusting how he's handled it or not handled it. But there is a lot to be said about the fault of China in unleashing this virus across the world and how they handled the situation when it was there. So because of that, this is probably sped up something that was going to inevitably happen anyways. Anytime you start bringing work into a country, it's going to raise the standard of living for everybody. And when that standard of living goes up, the wages need to go up, and things that were a lot cheaper for hiring labor become more expensive. And India has cheaper labor at this point than China does. Add into it that a lot of the Western countries are not happy with China and China's behavior after COVID, and they're looking for ways to get out of China. Now, I already mentioned one reason, or maybe even two reasons, why a lot of the countries want out of China. One of them being the mistrust because of the COVID situation, and another being that they just want more value from cheaper workers. And I have emphasis or quotes over value because, people should get paid what they're worth working. But there are other reasons why, besides just these two. And you've heard me say this, if you know me or you've seen any of my writings, is that China has, whereas a lot of Western countries might have a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, China has a 50-year plan, and they have a 500-year plan. And a lot of the movements that they've been making globally have been so that they can make China's power bigger, that they have more alliances across the world. And people are starting to finally really catch on with that. Add on top of it that the vast majority of the world is not communist, and the vast majority of the world wants to still live in a capitalist society. And China's not your friend. China is not where you want to have your dependencies on. So if you're a company like in the US that's making tech goods, like Apple, well, when you see that it's becoming very expensive or more expensive to make your products in China, China does not share the same political values as your home country, such as the United States. And China is starting to get in trouble due to long-standing plans that they've had in place. You start looking to alternative places in order to make things. Now, if you've done any sort of travel in your life, you'll understand what I'm talking about in some of the differences between Chinese and Indian culture. And one of the things in India is, as much as they've tried not to, they still have an unofficial caste system there. And I know some of this just from the study I've done, and also I've worked for a few Indian companies. But one of the things you don't do when you work for an Indian company is you never question your manager. And if you're American, I know you're like, oh my God, well, I might question my manager and it might get me in trouble, but I sure as hell will question my manager. No way, you don't do that in India. On top of it, India is very, very much a capitalist society. They're very much about making money, which China wants to make money too, because they need to make sure that their people are happy and that they have the revenue to be able to invest in other countries that will support their long-term goals. India's got long-term goals. I mean, every country has long-term goals, but they're not long-term goals of world domination, such as China may have or the United States might have. So if you're going to partner with somebody, wouldn't you rather partner with somebody who shares a lot of your same values, but you can still be making a buck off of? So if you want to partner with when you want to partner with a country where you're not going to have to pay as much and they're going to be more down with your systems of how you see the world, perceive the world, and you're not going to have to worry about some of the other political issues that you see coming out of China. It's in the news lately because China finally enforcing its control over Hong Kong. TikTok may actually be banned in many countries. And if you're not a tech person, you may not be aware, but China has been accused several times of rerouting worldwide internet traffic through their border in order just to sniff information from everyday people. There's a question as to whether China will interfere into the US election. I have no opinion about that. But China is a country that you need to watch. So COVID has actually opened up the perfect storm to start making moves against China, or has opened up people's eyes, because China is a huge market. You want to be able to sell your goods to China. They have so many people whose standard of living is just rising. And when they travel around the world, they spend far more than any other country does. They spend a lot of money. So you don't want to piss off that market. But by the same token, you don't want to lose your intellectual capital. You don't want people getting sick. And you certainly don't want to lose your global allies. And that's probably the most important of all, is you don't want to lose your global allies. And as I've mentioned before, China's been really good about making investments in Africa. They've made a lot of investments in Southeast Asia. They've made some investments in South America. But if somebody's giving you money to help you out, you always feel a little obligated, or they're going to ask for a favor down the road. So anybody who's been watching has felt really uncomfortable with what China's been doing with their investments in other countries. And I mean, you could sit there and throw the United States under the bus as well with that. But hey, we're all playing the same game. But a lot of people have felt uncomfortable with that. And then if you take on, the information gathering China has done by rerouting internet traffic several times over the past couple of years, not being completely honest about what's going on with COVID, it's going to make people feel really, really uncomfortable across the world. So that's why this investment in India of $1 billion for Apple is so damn interesting to me, because it's a perfect storm to finally make a strike at China, because I don't think anyone's been willing to outright do it just because they want access to those markets. India has a huge burgeoning population that can buy frivolous consumer goods, the newest phones, the best laptops. I mean, there is still a huge divide between the rich and the poor there. But as I said to a couple of acquaintances that I knew in Thailand that were complaining about the cost of blowjobs over the last 30 years. True story. I was in a bar and I was around some expatriates in Thailand who were complaining about how much blowjobs cost in Thailand when blowjobs used to be cheaper. And I just went off, because I tend to do when I get sick of people, and was like, well, if you still wanted a $5 blowjob, maybe y'all shouldn't have come to this country for sex tourism, because that's going to raise the standard of living for everybody. They're going to ask for more money. So now your $5 blowjob has become the $30 blowjob. And, that's fair. That's fair. If you're going to sit there and, raise the standard of living, people should be expected to be paid more for their blowjob. And I'm not going to get into whether or not the sex industry is okay or not okay. I'm just relating a story here. In my opinion, it's fine if it's consensual, but whatever. And I told him, like, if you want a $5 blowjob, then go to Laos. Go to Cambodia. The bar girls still are a lot cheaper than they are in Thailand. You shouldn't be wanting $5 blowjobs anyways. I mean, that's another whole story. But if you're going to sit there and bitch about it in the bar with me there, I'm going to address it. Same thing happens for, when you have a country that's making all your iPhones and the wages go up. It's going to be more expensive to make those iPhones because you invested so much in that country, which raised the wages, which now is eating into your bottom line. And on top of it, you're not too sure from a political standpoint if they're on your side or not. Hey, let's find another country that has maybe a culture that's a little bit more similar to ours, that the labor is cheap and has a burgeoning market to buy my goods. Yeah, so that's been my interest this week. And I'm going to keep my eye on that because I'm wondering how many more companies may move to or start investing in India. I think with COVID and with the bullshit that's been going on in the United States, I think we're going to see a lot of movements in the next year when it comes to the economy, the global economy, when it comes to who's making partnerships with who. And unfortunately, I think in the haves and the have-nots. I have said for the longest time that I think all the pieces start going into play in August with how our elections are going to go, how the U.S. economy is going to go, and that's all going to lead to the next, 12 to 24 months of, at least in the United States. And one thing that I've noticed is, and that we should fear as Americans, is that the world is going to learn and is learning to work without us. And that's something everybody should fear, because your powerful dollar will not be as powerful anymore when you've been just reduced to a bunch of sick people who are more worried about throwing temper tantrums in Costco instead of working together to be thought leaders in the world. So continue to watch this space, because I'm sure I'm going to have some more to say about this in the future as I keep watching what's going on, whether it be from, talking about combat sports when I feel like it, or these interesting things that's going on in tech and pop culture and whatnot. And, I'm really thankful. I'm sorry I'm a little late posting this, but I got a little tired and busy last night. But here it is. It's Monday, but you've got it. I thank you all for your support. I'm going to ask you to subscribe for when I do have time to upload these. If you've got any questions, please reach out to me on my website, which is www.mightbetasty.com. Follow me on Twitter, which is @MsTech. And otherwise, have a good rest of the week. You might hear from me again. You might not. But either way, wherever you are, please stay healthy, stay safe, and I hope